Hey, Dr. Amber here. Today's episode is part of a 10-part series for my virtual book tour. Yes, I am going on tour virtually, and I'm having 10 amazing conversations with people that I know and I really admire around the topics of overwhelm, overstimulation, dysregulation, all in preparation for my new book, A Parent's Guide to Self-Regulation, a practical framework for breaking the cycles of dysregulation and mastering emotions for parents and children. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. This conversation I really enjoyed, and I think you'll get a lot out of it too. And also, don't forget to order your copy of the book. You can get it on Amazon, Target, Walmart, Barnes & Noble, literally wherever you buy books. Okay? Enjoy the episode, and we'll talk soon. Hi, everyone. Dr. Amber here. We are here tonight talking about overstimulation in millennial moms. I'm going to be talking with a special guest, but what you really need to know is that this talk is in celebration of my new book, A Parent's Guide to Self-Regulation, which I hope that you have already pre-ordered your copy. I have my copies because I'm the author and I was sent my copies, and now it is time for you to get your copy. So if you enjoyed today's conversation, which I know you will, I want you to definitely go to the link in my bio and pre-order your copy of A Parent's Guide to Self-Regulation, because today we're going to be talking all about millennial moms, overstimulation. And the reason why we're talking about that is when we are chronically overstimulated as moms, that can lead to this emotional dysregulation that then could potentially impact your parenting, which I know that you don't want. So let's talk about it. And I'm going to talk about that with the Katrice Taylor. I'm so excited to chat with her. Well, for everybody joining, I'm sure that you probably know either at least one of us, but let's introduce ourselves. I'm Dr. Amber, clinical psychologist, and again, author of A Parent's Guide to Self-Regulation. And right now, I love talking all about parents and their emotional regulation tools, because we know that that is so important, especially as we are learning to teach and model that for our own children. Katrice, go ahead and introduce yourself.
So my name is Katrice Taylor. I am a mom of two, a wife, millennial mom, and content creator. And I started creating content specifically around motherhood after I had my first child in 2020 during the pandemic. And shortly after that, I just was so overwhelmed by the experience. And I just had so many experiences that I felt like were unique to me, but I found out they weren't unique once I started sharing and putting some humor into it here on Instagram and over on TikTok. And so I've built a great community of moms that can relate. And so it's just been a wonderful experience growing and finding like-minded women like yourself and many others. So I'm happy to be here.
Same. And you know what? When I was thinking about who I wanted to chat with in this virtual book tour, you definitely came to mind. One, because I also feel like I've connected with you in the process, but also just your content around millennial motherhood was so spot on. And I definitely think that's why and how you were able to build this community, because you do such a great job of creating content that really captures what we go through as millennial moms while adding some humor. So it's amazing. But then especially when you talk about overstimulation, I think for me, I will always see you do a video or some content around it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, she created the perfect video for what I'm writing about. And so it always felt like, oh my God, there's some synergy here, because she's creating this content about the stuff that I'm literally writing about in this book. So I'm just so excited for us to chat.
Yes, yes. That's amazing. That's so exciting. I love that.
Me too. Me too. And so again, you all, if you have questions for us or comments, feel free to put them in. I think where I would like to start, and you, Catrice, let me know what you're thinking, but I feel like a good place to start would be just talking about what we even mean when we say overstimulation,
Yeah,
because I'm sure it's like that
yeah.
first place to start. And I know I have some thoughts, but you tell me, like when you say the word overstimulation, or what does that mean for you and your experiences of it?
You know, so I first realized what overstimulation was in the context of mothering specifically, not even just parenting and adulting, but specifically mothering. Um, Shortly after my daughter, my first, started eating solid foods, got a little bit more out of the bottle stage and nursing stage. And for me, it started with feeding, specifically around feeding time. And it was a mixture of, you know, learning how to parent a toddler, which is something I'd never done before. And I just realized that it was the act of as a new mom, you're learning like, oh, I'm going to make this fresh thing and then I'm going to feed it and then I'm going to, you have this idea in your mind and then it goes completely differently. And so for me, I learned overstimulation when I was trying to make food in real time, feed it to my child in real time, clean in real time. She's crying in real time. The TV's on in real time. All of these things were going on at the same time that are just overstimulating stimuli that I had never experienced before because I always felt like I had control over my environment. And so that was really the pinpoint for me, timeline wise, where I was just like, oh my gosh, this is like, and then there's the fact that there's nothing quite that you can do about it. Just and then it's a continuation like day after day because you're learning. So for me, that was my first experience with truly overstimulation, and it became and then it grew into, you know, I always like to relate it to having your computer open, but having like 17 tabs open at the same time, but in your brain. And so that to me is overstimulation, and then it just ebbs and flows, you know, with motherhood. And then once you add, you know, going back to work to the mix and still being a partner, you know, if you're partnered to the mix, and if you are, you know, doing other things or you have side jobs and you're just maintaining your regular life outside of motherhood, that's each of those categories has additional tabs as well. So it's a lot.
Yes, absolutely. You said it perfectly. Same. Agreed. Like I too, I think I was mentioning on one of the other tour stops, but we were talking about mom rage. But same for overstimulation. And honestly, there's a lot of overlaps with like mom rage and overstimulation, but I had not even had any context for this idea of overstimulation until I became a mom. Because I think you said this word that was so key, control. For me, in the past, before having children, if I felt like I was being overstimulated by my environment or the people around me, I could just leave, or I could close the door, or I could just, change my environment. But with motherhood, it was like, oh, I can't just leave, close the door. Those were no longer tools that I could just easily use. And so I think for me specifically, and I think I see a comment, I'll read that eventually, but I think I had a pretty, a, a really good experience with baby number one. It was like ideal situation. Everything felt smooth. I was very lucky with that. But I definitely started to notice it once my first child was getting into toddlerhood, and then I was about to have my second. That's when I really felt like, okay, now I'm feeling like I'm at capacity. There's a lot stimulating me in my environment. I have 1,000 tabs open in my head, and there's nothing I can do about it. And so I just think it's so great that we're talking about this, because I think that we're not the only ones that experience that overstimulation. And also, hopefully, it can give some of you who are watching some language for it. And we'll talk about some tools and strategies today as well. And of course, one of them is definitely make sure you're pre-ordering the book. But yes, like overstimulation and motherhood for me for a while went hand in hand. And it was, this challenge of, okay, how do I continue to show up as a mom while also figuring out, what do I do with this overstimulation that I'm experiencing?
Yeah, and I actually have a question for you because, you know, once I think like there's the realization of what you're experiencing, the overstimulating feeling, right? But then, like, I'm curious to know when you had your second and you really started to feel it really intensely, what did you like? What were some of the ways that you knew that you were like at your capacity, you know, like, because I think there's a slippery slope sometimes with little kids, and it is to be expected that you're slightly overwhelmed and it is a little bit chaotic, especially when everybody depends on you literally to survive, changing, feeding, everything, mobility, everything. But I wonder, like, my question for you is, how did you know you were kind of at your capacity
Mhm.
those early days?
That's a really great question. And so I'm going to try to answer it while also giving you all who are watching some things to consider for yourself if you're also wanting to answer this question for you, because I think it's different for everybody. And honestly, what I will say for me, and this is why I'm so glad that we have this book now and we get to talk about this, I don't think I was doing the right things until recently.
Mhm.
Now it's like hindsight. I can look back on the first 2 years of having two children and see like, oh yeah, that was a sign, that was a sign. But in the moment, I absolutely don't think I had the tools that I needed. I don't think I was coping properly. I don't think I had the right support. But now when I'm in this space where I now have this language and these concepts down, it's a little different. But for me, when I look back, hindsight, I think the things that really let me know that I was overstimulated or that there was something going on was one, my irritability. I was so easily irritable at the smallest things. Children being children would just, I'm irritated. And it's just this, I call it a baseline irritability that just never really seemed to go away, right? Something else that I noticed for myself is that my home environment no longer felt comfortable for me. It felt like there were always tasks and always demands around me. And so it felt very draining to just be in my home, be in my space, be in my living room, be with my family. I think now realizing that was like, okay, I feel like maybe I'm being overstimulated by my environment or there's something going on, right? I also noticed that I just wasn't feeling as hopeful or as zestful, right? And of course, that's going to wax and wane as a new mom, right? We many times we struggle to find the energy and the motivation as a new mom, but there was just something about me just not feeling as good. And as I'm saying, I'm also realizing these are signs of depression. These are signs of anxiety. This can sound like postpartum depression. And so I feel like a good takeaway is to realize that if you are feeling overstimulated, it also can then lead to anxiety, depression. It can be correlated with postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety if you have that. And so I think that's why it's so important to think about our mental health as a whole, because this experience of overstimulation or emotional dysregulation, there's so many overlaps with some of the other mental health categories that we see. But those were some of the things that I noticed within myself that I didn't like. I didn't like that I was so irritable. I didn't like that I felt so anxious. I didn't like that I felt so discontent in my home and in my space. But I'm honestly very early on, I did not have the tool or the skills. I think very honestly, writing this book helped me to just reflect on so many of those experiences and really think about, okay, what actually needs to happen? What could have done differently? And now what are some things that I can do differently as a mom of a 5-year-old?
Right.
And it's really helpful now.
Yeah. Wow, that's really helpful. I'm so glad you were able to put words to all that, because I think one of the things that's unique to us as millennial moms specifically, that's different from previous generations and future generations, is we experienced a time where there wasn't all of this access to all this information. When we grew up, it just didn't exist.
Mhm.
And so as we're becoming parents and becoming moms, we now have this influx of information and all of these tools, but it's like you're juxtaposed in between the middle, and you're learning as you go. It just is a slightly different way than your mom and like than your children. So it's a really unique experience. And so I'm so grateful that we have tools like your book and resources like, your page and my page, and a myriad of other pages that can put language, like you mentioned, to these feelings, because they are normal. And, I think that I read recently, that millennials, specifically parents, spend about 56% more time with their kids than the previous generations. And
Yep.
that is a statistic that I think is really important, when it comes to overstimulation for us, because we don't, while we have information and we have technology, we have all these really cool things. We don't have the luxury of, a lot of people call it a village, but even just the luxury of just sending our kids outside. It's a different world, and we have to, the responsible thing to do is to adapt and to adjust to that. And so while in theory it's great to think, oh yeah, I can just send them out to play or send them to another friend's house, it's just not the reality that we live in. And so, being overstimulated comes with that territory, and no one else can really relate, except for us. And so I think it's so helpful to, your audience and to moms out there to have language around, that baseline irritability that you mentioned. That's really, really helpful, because it almost allows moms to have like their own, like thermostat, internal thermostat, if you will. And like, that's really helpful, because it's another tool to have to alert yourself, hey, I think I need to reach out to somebody, or my husband or my spouse or my friends, because I'm not feeling myself.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad you said like a thermostat, because in the book, one of the tools that I talk about is just this idea of, and again, this is going to sound so simple, you guys, but these simple tools are so powerful. This idea of really just keeping a check in with yourself of how am I feeling? Where am I at? Where's my baseline? How far am I from it? Because that will give you a lot of information. And I'm saying this because I think as moms, and especially millennial moms, and with some of the factors you talked about, like we are spending so much time with our kids, partly because we don't have that same village, partly because our neighborhoods and communities are just not as collective as they used to be, partly because we're just parenting differently as well. And so we might be a little bit more engaged. We're spending so much time with our kids. We have the internet, which takes up so much space in our brain. So many of us are doing all these extra things outside of our jobs and our professions. And so it's just, I actually just lost my train of thought. But there's so many things happening. Oh, checking in. So I'm saying that to say there's so many things happening. Many of us go into the habit of just like autopilot. We literally are just going day to day to day to day to day to day. And don't even make the time, or have trouble making the time, really just checking in with yourself. And so part of that process is really checking in to just know, like, how do I actually feel? Because if you can get a sense of how you're feeling, and then make some space between the reaction that might come after it, it can be so helpful just in terms of learning how to manage and cope with whatever is going on for you. So yeah, like taking that temperature check, whether it's every morning, every afternoon, every evening, maybe at your lunch hour, checking in with yourself and really just thinking, how do I feel? No judgment, no nothing. How do I actually feel in this moment? And that'll give you some information. It's really helpful. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. um Another question that I had for you, and this relates more to the book, but in the book, I'm curious to know, like, what are some of the tools that are suggested, if you could give like a little sneak peek, for when you are feeling overstimulated? Because I have some things that have worked for me now with a 4 and 3 year old. I had to think about it for a minute. A 4 and 3 year old, along the way, especially having the pandemic as kind of a catalyst to my parenting. But I'm curious to know what some of the tools are, if you care to share a little bit.
I would love to share. And again, you all, like we are talking about this book right here, just in case you're wondering, like, well, what book is she talking about? A Parent's Guide to Self-Regulation. So what I would love to share is the framework. So in this book, there is this 3-part framework, and I call it the PCR method. And I felt like it was so important to have a framework for this, because this book is so much more than just like a list of tools, right? There's tools, but it really is, I wanted to make sure that parents had a framework for how to think about any situation they may find themselves in with regard to regulating their emotions, overstimulation, feeling burnt out, right? So there's 3 parts to this framework. One part is called the practical approach. With this approach, I really teach you all and guide you through what are the strategies you need to be implementing to better understand yourself, your parenting triggers, and then also how do you come up with a plan for tackling those triggers? So, for instance, I think a really big factor in the practical approach is really thinking about parenting triggers. I think all of us have them.
Mhm.
It for some people, I know many of us have a big trigger around our children crying, or maybe a big trigger around mealtime. I feel like we've talked about that. Mealtime is so triggering for some parents. Or, maybe whenever their child feels hurt or gets upset, that can be a trigger. Really identifying, okay, what are the moments that I know will elicit some sort of reaction from me, accepting that that's going to happen, and then what's my support plan around it.
Mhm.
So the approach is really, again, very strategic. It's like someone actually sitting down with you and saying, hey, think about yourself as a parent, think about your day to day. What are the areas you need to be watching out for, and how do we make a plan for it?
Mhm.
Okay. The second approach is called the conscious approach. I love the conscious approach because it's less strategic and more theoretical, and helps us really think about, what do I actually want out of my parenting experience? I know many millennials gravitate to a conscious parenting approach sometimes. And with this conscious approach, I really do pull some of those principles from it. So this part of the framework really calls you to think about, okay, who am I as a parent? What are the things I learned about parenting? What are some of the things that are coming in from my own experiences as a child? Is reparenting something that needs to be happening for me? Are there some healing or trauma that I need to be addressing so that I can be parenting better? Sometimes I realize that for moms who are overstimulated chronically, or who are really struggling with managing their emotions, sometimes it's less about the day-to-day grind. Like, that's still a factor, but sometimes it's a lot of these old emotions that just have not been addressed, have not been looked at, have not been uncovered, and we're just like, I'm too busy, I can't handle that, I can't.
Mhm.
Right? But that conscious approach really calls for you to take a look at that stuff, and whether it's in therapy or through your own process of reflection or journaling, really starting to make a plan for, how do I handle some of the old emotional junk that is clouding me and not allowing me to show up as a parent, or the parent that I need to be. The last approach in this framework is the R, and the R stands for realistic. And
Mhm.
so this part, I felt like it was so important to just be honest and real. Like, look, y'all, you're going to get the book, you're going to read the book, you're going to love the book, and then you're going to still make mistakes. You're still going to be overwhelmed. You're still going to feel some moments of overstimulation. And this realistic approach is really all about helping you to radically accept the ways that your life has changed now that you are a parent, the way that you might have some challenges, that there will continue to be challenges, and also you will continue to be imperfect as a parent.
Yeah.
And finding the joy in that, embracing that, being okay with that. Because again, I find that some of us who struggle with overstimulation, emotional dysregulation, many times there are changes happening that we are not accepting of, and we're fighting against it. But what happens if we really start to embrace some of these hard things or these hard moments in parenting? How might that shift how we're engaging with our emotions and our feelings, and then also the challenges of our day? So all of that, putting it all together, that will give you a lot of what you need, because essentially it really depends on the person. Some people might be a little bit more strategic. Some people might need some more theoretical work around, like, well, what's going on with me consciously as a parent? But then also some people might just really need to settle into, hey, my life has changed. How do I grieve the losses and move forward in a really healthy way?
Yeah, wow. That's a great framework, and very, like you said, I know realistic is the last part, but it is incredibly realistic because there's different avenues for different moms and their mother, where they are in their motherhood journey. And I think that's really important because, what may work for a new mom may not work for a seasoned mom who's still feeling overstimulated. So that's really cool. I can't wait to read it and have it as a tool. Um, I know that one of the tips for me that's made the biggest difference when I am overstimulated is adjusting my expectations. And that is something that has helped tremendously. I know millennials, we also are very um, we were sold, a very specific kind of path to life, and a lot of us have a lot of achievements, and we're very driven, and we're very motivated, and we rack up several accolades, along the way, and that just is specifically speaking to us, and I know other generations are as well, but and so when you are incredibly driven and you have an experience of being in control, again, there's that word of kind of like your path, and then here comes this baby and here comes this experience that is brand new. It does require a little bit of adjustment for your expectations, and I think that a lot of us go into it thinking that it's going to be similar to our other areas of life that we were able to, succeed in, for lack of a better word, by whatever metric, you can come up with. But in this arena, there's no trophy, there's no graduation, there's no diploma, there's no paycheck, there's nothing tangible, essentially that comes with it. And so it can be really tricky to get in there and think, I'm going to knock this out of the park. But once you realize that knocking it out of the park has different parameters than everything else you've done, it's time to really start adjusting. And so for me, that was a big, big, big part of what allowed me to be able to start enjoying my motherhood journey. And it took a while. It wasn't immediate. But I had to learn to adjust what I expected out of this experience and really take into account, the age of my children and, my own just personal just experience being pregnant back to back and being postpartum and nursing and, learning how to be a mom and all the other things that are going on in regular life. I had to adjust the expectations. And, I think the biggest part of that was lowering them when it came to my kids and some of the monotonous tasks that would happen. You mentioned mealtime. That's a big trigger for me. Mealtime, transitions are very stressful because, pick up, drop off, like those types of things. And just kind of going into it, like you mentioned, anticipating, like, okay, I know this may trigger me, but like, just even saying that to yourself. But for me, lowering the expectation, I remember specifically, I was, you know, so focused on mealtime and making sure that my daughter, this was my first child, had, fresh oranges. And I wanted to cut the oranges fresh or the cuties fresh, and she didn't like them. And my therapist actually suggested to me very gently and very sweetly, you get like the mandarin, you can get the oranges that are at the store, and it just didn't even cross my mind because I was just I had this idea of what I wanted to do and what I wanted this to look like, and it hadn't crossed my mind that there are different ways to skin a cat. And she was so sweet to explain that to me, but that was the beginning of me being able to really say, okay, maybe I'll be able to serve the fresh oranges in 10 years, but not right now, and that's okay. So I think part of adjusting expectations isn't taking that personal and making that a personal attack on yourself as a mom and as a person, but just being realistic and saying, it's not a no, it's just a not right now.
Mm-hmm. Loved that. Yes, 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 yes. Oh my gosh. Yes, yeah. Readjusting those expectations of what to expect from us, from our kids, even from our partners if we are partnered, just completely readjusting those expectations so that we are not constantly being disappointed or constantly pushing for something that realistically is just not for right now. And I always remember that when I think a few months ago you kind of talked about your solo parenting, those experiences. And I feel like that was another experience for you where you really had to readjust the expectations during those times. And that resonated for me because my partner also travels for work occasionally. And I too had to very much readjust the expectations when he's not here.
Yes.
And it's been really helpful, and I'm sure that's been helpful for you. And so really, yeah, being more flexible and just acknowledging that yes, this moment might be hard, but it probably is temporary, and maybe this ideal version of what I want can be for later. I love that.
Yes, absolutely. That is something that a little bit later, once the pandemic ended, and even a year or so after that, my husband's travel did pick up, and so kind of speaking to the fact that it's just us, and that's another thing that's kind of unique to millennial parents. It's just us kind of doing this thing, and so when he's traveling, it's just me, and I work full time, and like many of us do, we have a lot of balls in our court, and so that was another thing specifically around screen time. Was we have a good screen time kind of regimen that we practice during the normal weeks when we're both home and we're both on it, but those weeks when it's just me, I was trying to adhere to that same schedule, and it just wasn't working. And so I had to say, okay, I'd rather them have, it's better for them to have a little extra screen time than having a dysregulated parent. And so that, I'm sure you talk about that in your book too, with the regulation, but that also helped me, because then I didn't have this, imaginary or, arbitrary feeling of guilt when they were content and I was able to get a task done because I was by myself. So, very, very keen on lowering expectations. But with that, you've got to also make sure that that doesn't mean that it's in every capacity and it's in every avenue of mothering and it's in every part of parenting and yourself and it takes over. I think we have to be careful of that, because when you're postpartum you can be really, your hormones are all over the place and your emotions are all over the place, and in one arena you can lower your expectations, but also it can slip into other areas. So I think you have to be careful when you're so used to being a high achiever, to make sure that you have a healthy balance. But I do think when it comes to some of the kid-centered things, meals, getting dressed, feeding, transitions, drop off, pick up, those areas, I think you definitely have to extend quite a bit of grace, more so than you probably expected going into it.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And it's funny, I love that last point that you made about it's better for the kids to have a little bit more screen time than to have a dysregulated mom. And I feel like that concept can apply to so many other things. And I think what I love about this book is that it really helps you to really focus on you, essentially. And anyone who knows or follows me knows I'm a huge advocate for, hey, moms, let's really figure out, how do we also prioritize our needs in the midst of all the other things that we're doing? Because we often put our children first, our partners first, and that is beautiful and amazing. And we have to make sure that in the midst of all of that, some of our needs are in there too. And so what I really tried to help the reader understand is that in some moments, it actually might be better to prioritize whatever it is that you are needing, because that ensures that you get your needs met and your children actually get a better version of you. So, for instance, with the example that you gave, maybe ideally it'd be better for them to have less screen time, right? But if you're pushing that and then you're exhausted and you're overwhelmed because now the kids need a little bit more engagement, are the kids really getting this better version of you? Probably not in that moment. But if you really need the help, you're having a hard time, add in a little bit of extra screen time, you are less overwhelmed, less burnt out, and you actually get to show up a little bit differently. And the children also really benefit from that. And
Right.
so just have found so often that the more that I'm actually thinking about, okay, what would actually make this easier for me in this moment, or I know that this particular thing is a parenting trigger for me, what do I need to get through this moment? I have found that it has been beneficial for me, but also for my kids, because they get to just see this better regulated version of me that I want them to be able to experience a little bit more often. And so, I really like to help moms feel more comfortable and have less guilt about thinking about their own needs, because essentially our kids really need us to think about ourselves at times, because we get to actually be the moms we really want to be when we are more rested, more regulated, more centered. I think that's really important.
Absolutely, for sure. Um, I agree with you. I think that there's so much opportunity for us to, find tools and resources and tips and tricks. Um, and I think too, something that I just want to make sure that everybody listening knows, the fact that you are doing those things and seeking out those tools and, looking and for ways to, quote unquote, be a better mom, um, and spending your time researching and just spending time on things like this live and, engaging with content around it, that already means that you are just eons past, what it means to be a good mom. And so, I think that too, with overstimulation with millennial parents and moms specifically, is, the opposite side of things is that we have so much out there for us that it's hard to apply everything. And so the fact that you're even looking for something in the first place puts you, 10 steps ahead, than if you weren't. And so I think that's really important to share with moms, because it's a lot,
Yeah.
and we're the first to really just have this experience. So yeah.
I feel like that's the perfect note to end on. Like, you all are doing a good job. You're showing up. You're listening to this live. You're hopefully pre-ordering your copy of this book right here, A Parent's Guide to Self-Regulation. We know how much you want to better show up, or be better for your children. We know how bad you want to do things differently, and none of it's in vain. And so I think that's even more reason to give yourself some grace. Be compassionate with yourself, as compassionate as you want to be with your children. Do that to yourself, because we cannot really show up for our kids and be compassionate for them, and give them grace if we're not doing it for ourselves too. So I hope that if anyone's watching and they are feeling defeated, or if they're feeling like they're having a hard time, or feel like they can't get these things right, you can, you will. I'm hopeful that my book will be able to support you in it, but also you're probably doing better than you think. I think millennials in general, especially moms, we are so hard on ourselves. And like you said, Katrice, we have so much access to information. Like, there's so many ways that we could be doing something, and we feel like we want to be able to do it all. But I want us to all feel assured, rest assured, we are doing a good job. We are doing our best. And I'm hopeful that things will continue to get better for anyone who is struggling or having a hard time with overstimulation.
About your book, what I like about your book is it's not, it doesn't seem to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem to be as child centered as it is, parent and mother centered. And that alone is almost like, a tool in and of itself, because hey, this is something for you. Every day we give and give and give to our families and to our children. And so I think that your book, A Parent's Guide to Self-Regulation, there alone in the title, therein lies the key to all of this. Is you've got to be able to be the mom and the parent you want to be, you've got to give yourself the opportunity to find out what works best for you as a human first, because you forget, that's what you are first. And I was actually reading a comment. It says baby two is almost here, almost two, and she's expecting again. It's worse this time because she's trying to wean. The sensitivity of her body makes every day really hard. And I will say this, and I know this is a little bit off of well, not off the topic, but when you are nursing, I mean, it is just
Yeah.
the amount of grace that you've got to give yourself is just insurmountable. Like, because that is directly tied to just, I don't even know the words, and I'm surprised that we don't have 100 studies about the level of overstimulation and being touched out when you are nursing. And no one ever explained that to me. And I had to learn for myself. And so it affects you in so many physical ways, way past the actual act of nursing. And so, being able to have something for yourself as a mom to know, okay, I'm a human first. I've got to figure out what works for me, for my brain, for my body, for, I've got to, my health, all of these things before I can even be, this parent to myself. So I wanted to bring that up because if you're nursing, I mean, it is such a unique experience. And, personally for me, when I stopped nursing both of my kids, it took me time, even after I weaned, to even get ready to get back to start feeling. I mean, it's just such a process. So I definitely wanted to shout you out
Yeah,
because the elation that you feel when you're nursing, I think, from my experience, is worse.
absolutely. I think you said it so well. Because also in the book, I feel like we could just have this conversation for hours. I know we will end eventually, but like, thinking about the different ways you can be overstimulated physically, emotionally, cognitively, like my gosh. And a lot of times when you're nursing, it's all of it, all at the same time. You're touched out. Your mind is probably thinking about all these other things while you're nursing. Emotionally, you probably are not super regulated. Like, it is a lot. So, like you said, the amount of grace you need to give yourself if you're nursing. I wish I gave myself more grace. I did not give myself nearly enough grace when I was nursing, especially with baby number two, because I also had a toddler. And so I want more moms to do it at the onset prior to, having to look back hindsight and then think, yeah, I probably should have given myself more grace. Like, please be gracious and compassionate with yourself through the process because it is not easy,
Right.
but you do it and you gotta be just grace. Give
Yeah.
yourself some. But to your other point, though, yes, this book is about us. I think with the topic of self-regulation or overstimulation or dysregulation, a lot of times it's very child focused. It's like, how do I help my child through a tantrum? How do I help them to self-regulate? How do I help them to learn healthy emotional coping skills? And I have found that many millennial parents are asking those questions and having trouble with the answer because they themselves don't know how to do it. It's like, well, how am I going to help my toddler cope with something hard if I am still struggling to cope with hard things too?
Right.
And this book is for us, because like we have enough resources for how to help our kids,
Yeah.
regulate themselves, but we don't have enough resources for I as the parent need some guidance how to do this for myself. And for those of you who are worried, like, hey, but if I take too much time to learn this for myself, when will I ever teach my kid? The beauty in this is that your kid is going to be watching you through your process and they will learn through you modeling. And so it's like two birds with one stone. While you are learning and teaching yourself, you are also modeling these skills for your kids. Your kids are always paying attention to you, they're always watching you. So, no, they're not going to be left out of this process at all. You focusing on you is also going to greatly benefit them because they're going to learn through you. And I'm excited for everybody to have that experience.
Absolutely. Me too. Me too. Really, really excited. For the book. I did see one more comment. I never related the high achieving thing to motherhood and seeking out that same expectation. Yes. Um, really, really important because, I think we go so many years and all these years um, getting to that finish line in whatever area that is, and then we become parents and they give you that baby and then you go home and it's just, the baby is treated like a king or a queen, but you as the parent are just sometimes just raggedy trying to make it through. It's like, wait a minute, this isn't what I am used to. So that's another reason why I'm excited for the book because it gives us a space to relate, to other parents and have some tools and tips to be able to relate to that actually are going to help us, because the kids, what they say, the kids are all right, it's us that needs the help.
Absolutely. Katrice, thank you so much. I really do appreciate your time. I know that evening hours for moms is touch and go because we got the kids and we're tired. It's end of day. So I truly appreciate you having this conversation with me. And thank you so much for your support around the book and sharing it. I really do appreciate it. And I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, course, thank you. I mean, I know how much work you have put in and some of the pivoting you've done to really honor yourself and the space that you're in and that you've been in, over the course of the past few years that I've been following you. And it's been such a joy to see, and you've been such a great example on how to really look inward and to look into yourself and see, what you need at this time, and that it's okay to pivot and change. And so I appreciate your vulnerability with your audience. It's really been incredibly helpful. And, you keep showing up. And I think that that's amazing. And that's such a great example to not only your community, but to your kids and everything. So you're doing a wonderful job. And I can't wait to get the book. And I can't wait to share it with my audience as well. And this is going to be the first book of mine, that, like I said, that is for us, by us, millennials and moms. And so it's the first tool in my toolkit, that I'm going to be able to really say, like, this is really a guide to how to make sure that your child is taken care of, but that you are as well. And it's more practical. It's not a bunch of things that I can't put into place. So I'm really excited, and congratulations again.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it so much. And again, everyone, this book is available for pre-order right now. I hope that you will go to the link in my bio, pre-order your copy, and then you'll receive it on June 18th. It'll come to your home June 18th, and you can start reading it, share it with everyone else. But I so appreciate everyone who tuned in with us tonight. Make sure you follow, give both of us a follow, because both of us talk about these topics often. And so you will definitely feel less alone if you're following us and tuning in. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate everyone for taking the time to tune in. Katrice, I hope you have a good rest of your night, and I will talk to you
Thank
soon.
you. You as well. Good to see everybody. Thank you. Bye.